Are we ready to record a common room?
We are indeed.
Yeah. I thought we already were.
Kinda. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another common room.
Cheers.
Wait, for those who know, no, this is recorded, if you're really wondering, on Friday after a big game last night, January 8th, January 9th, one of those
So
two.
those who know, know. Those who don't care, still don't care.
Still say no. So mine, it's a coffee out of my Suzhou mug. It's the town in China where I last was, and I've been to that little pagoda palace thing.
And mine's an athletic brewery.
Yeah. Is that a large? Oh, that's one of those. Nice. Yeah, I love those glasses.
Yeah, if anyone ever wondered what our Iona beer glasses look like, this is it.
Ah,
Isn't it a thing of beauty?
Fantastic. It is. Are we toasting anybody today, gentlemen?
I don't think so. You got anything you want to toast to?
We're toasting Cloud. Cloud, as you get smarter and smarter and continue to program and code so well, we pray that your biases and weights in your internal neural net model continue to perform wonderfully to advance civilization.
You're addressing
Cheers.
a technological whatever.
Well,
How about to our
and if you
listeners
mess up-
and our new year?
and if you mess up, we'll set some wild animals on you. Cheers.
Cheers. Listeners, that, by the way, those are the chimes.
For those that didn't know, Cloud is Anthropic's model that competes with ChatGPT and arguably is the best programming one, which is one I use the most.
Keep trying to take my job, but I'm still smarter than it. So suck it.
Yes. You can try speaking into your phone and saying, open the pod bay doors, Hal. That's for you boomers and Gen Xers out there.
Yeah, Siri's got a whole load of little Easter eggs like that. Right, so Common Room today is 2025. How's it going so far? Resolutions you've made, hot takes for the year, predictions.
I'm preaching about resolutions on Sunday, and the word actually comes from the Latin word for loosen or dissolve. Right? And in fact, dissolve has that same word.
So
to make
basically.
Resolution means to give up or untie or loosen again. And so while I always think of resolutions as, oh, here's what I'm going to do, there's a certain amount of it kind of like with Lent. And that's what I'm going to preach. I mean, for Christians, for liturgical Christians, you got 3 new beginnings. You've got the new liturgical year in December with Advent. You've got the calendar new year, January 1st, and then coming up in March this year, because Easter is almost as late as can be. You've got Lent. But I mean, how many of our resolutions stick? And so what I'm going to encourage folks to do is be gentle with themselves in their failures. When you make a resolution and then inevitably it just, it goes away. It's hard to do something for 40 days or whatever. But also think about our baptismal vows, and those might be resolutions to look at. So for those of you who have been baptized with a formula, like the baptismal covenant in my church, that might be a way to kind of go, okay, I'm going to respect the dignity of all human beings and, all the rest of those things. Yeah, Matt, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if we should be that soft on people. I mean, those who say they can and those who say they can't are both usually right. And so, giving them
I'm going
too
to
much
be
grace,
as soft on people as God is.
Let's
whose mercies are new every morning.
Let's keep these resolutions. Mary Margaret told me a story. She said, I love this story. She was like, this one student was in this class and fell asleep, and this professor had put 2 problems on the board, and the student woke up, and right before the end of class, it was like, oh shoot, quickly wrote down the problems so he knew he could go do these. And so he goes off and he spends hours and hours and hours researching them, doing them, solving them, then turns them in. And he later finds out the professor put them on because they were 2 unsolvable problems, but he was able to solve it because he had no idea they were unsolvable. You got to don't give people a back door. We will take it.
Yeah, no, well, and what I'm partly acknowledging is that, people are going to, fall and fail. And my bishop says people don't need good advice. They need good news. We're already filled with good advice. Should we steel ourselves to be like Lewis, the most thoroughly converted that we can be? Should I purpose in my heart every day to live a righteous and upright life? Absolutely, I should. Should I always be seeking the kingdom of God? Absolutely, without any question. But I should never mistake it for a measure of my self-worth, nor a measure of God's passion and care for me. Yes, he made perfect rules, and he knew that we were going to fail them. And so, great, let me steel myself to get all the things done today. But at the end of the day, if I haven't, if I feel worse about myself, I'm not sure that that's exactly the voice of God, whose mercies are new every morning. And as I like to say, it's always morning somewhere.
Although by that logic, it's always nighttime somewhere as well. So I think how you interpret that is really up to you.
If David and Andrew do Paul and Paul McCartney and John Lennon, it's getting better all the time. Can't get much worse.
Don't they say fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? I just want to instill a whole bunch of fear in people. Be afraid.
No, it means be in awe. So, yeah.
Well, how's the year gone for you guys so far? We are now 10 days in.
Yep.
Okay, Matt
yes.
ties his self-worth to what a bunch of other people do on a field somewhere.
Yes. That's exactly right. Especially when they're, I submit to authority like I do the Catholic Church. Sometimes you just have to tie yourself to something outside of your being. And it tends to work. And if you choose right.
But if you choose wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's just hope that your devotion to your college team reminds you of Our Lady, after whom it is named.
That's exactly right. I was going to go there and just say it's a devotion to our mother, Notre Dame.
What was that pronunciation? Okay,
Notre Dame,
mangled French. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so far this year, I'm starting to catch up on Half Pint episodes. And so I interviewed Serena Higgins about the Ideas Worth Saving conference, which is going to be happening very soon in San Francisco at the Internet Archive. That looks really fun. Matt, if you could get out there, I think you'd have fun with it as well. Because needless to say, AI is mentioned. By the way, we will be doing an AI episode some point within the next month or so, because Matt really wants to talk about it. But the other interview that I also did was with Annie Crawford. Because the Symbolic World is doing a course on a book that Andrew occasionally mentions. They're doing one on Till We Have Faces.
C.S. Lewis's best book.
Yeah, so if season 3 wasn't enough for you, you could go and sign up for that. And for people that don't know, the Symbolic World, it's founded by Jonathan Paju. He's associated with Jordan Peterson. He's been in this stuff for years. And he has actually just done an interview on the other Pints podcast on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas, like a 3-hour-long chat. And his stuff on fairy tales was fantastic. He was talking about the deep symbolic meaning of fairy tales. And in particular, he was talking about Hansel and Gretel. And so if you remember, the mother wants to get rid of the children, the father doesn't. And when they basically leave them in the woods, they then get taken in by another female. This one's a witch. She's basically another evil female character. But her response is different because she wants to keep them. But she wants to keep them so she can consume them. Cue Andrew talking about Orwell and distorted love for a while.
Yes, absolutely. Well, actually, funny enough, I got an email from a listener this week who said, talked about their kind of their background and some of the struggles, spiritual struggles that they had and psychological struggles. And then they said this. A month ago, I checked my podcast feed. I had only listened to Pints with Jack seasons 1 and 2 and had not listened at all for at least 18 months, partly because I had never read Till We Have Faces. But that day, I decided to get the book right away and start reading it, accompanied by Matt and David. This was exactly what I needed. I agree with you and Jack that this is far and above his best work. When you said it could be at the level of Hamlet or Paradise Lost, I raised my eyebrows, but now I surrender to that idea too. This book has saved my spiritual life.
Wow. I think you wrote that yourself. I think you wrote that yourself. But it's
I'll forward that to
sentiment.
I'll forward that to you. But of what other of his books will somebody say this book saved my spiritual life?
It's great of us.
Give me some proof that you didn't write yourself, and I'll take it. But I think that we all agree. Of course, we wouldn't be here if we didn't agree that Lewis, means so much to so many. So, yeah. And so I'm working through some essays on Joy Davidman. Pulling together a book of some essays on Joy Davidman until we have faces. I'm finishing up the book from Virginia Seminary. That's due to be turned in this month. So I'm busy with copy edits. Kristen just finished another book, and then now she's on to writing her book on C.S. Lewis, a reader's companion to all 14 of his fiction. So
they say that you become the average of the people you spend the most time around. I really would have thought by now, Andrew, some of her book writing speed would have rubbed off on you. I'm starting to deeply question this.
Between the two of us, we've written over 80 books.
Mm-hmm.
It truly is right. So I mean, to some degree,
and me and all of the me and Mike Tyson, we've won so many boxing titles together.
Yeah,
and me and Elon Musk paid $18 billion in taxes last year.
Yeah, and Donald Trump and I became president of the United States. Anything can happen in this country.
Well, not to you. But by the end of July, I should have my fourth edited book by Lewis, and I should be well on my way writing my book Until We Have Faces. So, we're rolling along. You were saying, Matt?
I will say it would be interesting to be like, what does she do? And what is her process? Is she incredibly good at deep work where she can just allocate 2 hours and it will be productive towards output? Or is it she's just really good at getting ideas in her head to paper really quickly? I mean, just genuinely, that's a remarkable output.
So here's the thing about my bride, and part of why she's such a treasure to me. And we just, by the way, this week celebrated our 8th anniversary. So cheers to her.
I love that.
She is a patterner. She's an idea person. And so for her, the fun of a book, yay! For her, the fun of a book is kind of plotting it out and seeing where things go. In seminary, I think I may have told the story before, I would get up in the morning and read her at 5 o'clock or whatever, finish writing my, 4-page essay. I'd read it to her. And while still working on her first cup of coffee, she would say, okay, it's really good, but you need to delete paragraph 3. You need to move paragraph 5 up to paragraph 2. And you say always 3 times in paragraph 7. And then you need a little bit more punch in the conclusion. She would not be taking notes. She can just see all those things. I'm always in the moment. She's always thinking about what's ahead and what's going on.
Is she an
so
INTJ?
For her, the process of what's that?
Is she an INTJ?
She is exactly an INTJ.
I can literally, as you describe this, like this is what I like to do with AI and programming. I'm like, I can see version 1.52, 2.53, where it is today, where it's going, and then I have every idea in my head because I love to map out a system. It's like my greatest
when it comes
joy.
to writing, I like that too. I mean, I have to have a title, and then I have to have an outline. I want to see the progress, to how to get there. So with a sermon or whatever. So that's the kind of initial part. And then there's the kind of physical challenge of just sitting there and banging out chapter after chapter. So she just finished for Dayspring, a devotional on the 365-day devotional. So they have readings for every day of the year, and she's writing between 50 and 150 words for each day. And so to say the thing, to not repeat oneself, to be able to make something out of the passage, that's the kind of hard and even physically demanding work to sit there for that long, And so those, I think, are the two parts. But the mapping out of it in a way that she can do it is where she really gets, I think, some joy.
To say the very thing you really mean, the whole of it, nothing more or less.
That is the true art and joy of words. Yeah, I think that if we ran a little AI scan on how much David has quoted Till We Have Faces in the last year versus me, I think I know where that tilts.
I actually commented in my interview with Annie about that. I said, I'm actually pretty sure I quote it more often than he does now. Yeah.
Another development, too, I've been discussing Till We Have Faces and Early Prose Joy with Michael O'Peasy. I met him at the Davenant conference and then baptized his sons, his and Kimberly's sons. And then we saw them at the Portland conference. And I have asked him and Annie Nardoni to be the kind of academic track advisors for the upcoming C.S. Lewis conference that we'll do here in Winter Garden, May 2nd and 3rd. May 2nd and 3rd, listeners. And so we're going to do kind of a reader's track of breakouts, and then what we're going to call, I think, a bander track. And so we're going to have people bring their academic works in progress and work on them together over 3 breakout sessions. And so he and Annie are talking, and so things look to be going really well for that.
I love this.
I've got some of my reading here for the coming year.
Oh.
So the C.S. Lewis hoax. I've heard about this. Catherine Linskud, and my next door neighbor, he's a former librarian. And every now and again, when he comes across like a Lewis book he hasn't seen before, just picks it up and puts it in my my mailbox, which is really
lovely.
Nice.
Suggestion, though, she did 3 iterations of that book, and that was the first. The last one is called Sleuthing C.S. Lewis, and it's longer. She
with this one.
really... What's that? That's why you started with this one.
I like books that are short and to the point.
It caused a huge stir and actually divided the Lewis world between Hooperians and Linskugians. Catherine Linskug wrote to Lewis. I don't think they ever met. And at one point, he praised her thesis, which she published as The Lion of Judah in Never Neverland, and says, "You're right in the center of the mark everywhere. In fact, I think you know my work better than I do." And she really got drunk with that. And a lot of times, Lewis kind of creates this possessiveness in people. You know, he's my Lewis. How dare anybody else say anything about him? I think he had that same effect amongst his friends. And so she really personalized it. And then she called out Walter, who may have really overstated some of what he did with Lewis. But it became a real nasty war. And she accused Walter Hooper of forging the Dark Tower manuscript, which he clearly did not.
Nobody would forge anything that weird.
Yeah, exactly. But she really kind of, and then everyone who didn't support her, she took it as a personal attack. And, you know, she died of, she was ill and writing from bed for many years. And, you know, it was sad. She died several years ago. But she really kind of took it personally and then kind of went to town on Walter. And like I said, he probably overstated some things. But it really divided the C.S. Lewis world in a really unpleasant way. And there are still people who, you know, really deride Walter and champion Kay. It's tough. And so I'd be interested to hear what you think of the arguments.
It's a chapter in the story I just wasn't here for, so I'm just kind of curious. I have my opinions about the best conclusions that I've heard. I don't think make any sense, but I figure, you know, go to the horse's mouth. The other books that I'm reading, will be reading.
Yes, Matthew Dickerson.
Yes, so firstly they were on discount at the publishers, so snap those up. But also, we're planning on having him here to talk about C.S. Lewis and the Inklings more broadly and their ecological outlook. Several listeners had asked us about the Inklings and ecology, and I thought, this season was the time. And this is the one I'm diving into.
Jeffrey Barbeau.
That's cool.
Yeah. Pretty cover. The Hansen lectures that come out of the way, they always have very pretty covered books.
Honestly, the title is pretty great. The Last Romantic, too. I honestly want to read it from the title alone.
Northwind Seminary did they call them advances, not retreats, but they did an advance at the Wade Center in conjunction with his lecture. I think that was 2 years ago, January. So, yeah.
And the thing that I'm reading right at this moment is Why Literature Still Matters. It's over my bed. And it's the Jason Baxter book. It's his latest with Cassiodorus Press, which is from the folks from the Literary Life podcast. It is wonderful. I bought it for my wife as a Christmas present, safe in the knowledge that she would read it within the day, and then I would get a chance to read it.
That's great. Well, I gave Kristen for Christmas one of Julia Golding's books, one of her Regency mystery novels. And so that's been on her shelf. I'm reading Alan Jacobs, who wrote The Narnian. And he also wrote In the Year of Our Lord 1943, which mentions Lewis in that context. But there's a series called Lives of Great Religious Books. And these are biographies of books. So George Marsden did one on Mere Christianity, and Alan Jacobs has done one on the Book of Common Prayer, starting with Cranmer in the 1540s. And he's a great writer, and I'm really enjoying that. And it's also really helping me understand some of the wars around the liturgy. I mean, every day, every Sunday, I say at the liturgy, you may stand or kneel. But that was a huge fight for centuries, whether we stand or kneel to receive communion. So anyway, that's been
I would
part
love
of what
to sometime bring on, I'm going to actually see him tonight for Common Room, my buddy he's at Catholic University here in systematic theology for his PhD, and liturgy is his thing. And he really even struggles with, he's Catholic, but he struggles with the existing form of the Mass, and he also struggles with the Latin Mass. So he's not in either of those. He's very much 9th century St. John Christendom. And I asked him a question once over drinks, and he was like, I said, like, what standard do you judge this against? And is this like a personal preference? And his answer, to be honest, was beautiful. And it kind of convinced me that there is a better or worse version of it, in a kind of some principles we can apply to determine it. Because I was like, to some degree, if this was 9th century, like, why is 9th century better than what we kind of see in 150 AD, when we see a little bit of language around what a service could look like in the who's the guy that wrote in 150, David?
You know about Justin Martyr.
Yeah. And so we have like a little image of what, and that honestly sounds a lot like what the current form is, which is kind of very similar to Catholic Mass and what you guys do.
Form. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, skeletal form, which is what you guys do as well, Andrew. So it's like,
or what we would say in this country, skeletal.
Yeah. So to some degree, you're like, all right, well, but then he could push back and go, why is just closer to the origin necessarily more right? I mean, there's different ways to think about it. So I just feel like there's an interesting conversation that could be had. And it would be really interesting to have it with Andrew on too. And just like,
yeah,
because I genuinely am curious. And I was at a Byzantine Catholic Rite place in Chicago over Christmas. And I was like, man, I could see how this draws your heart up into the divine liturgy in a way that I haven't experienced in my own services, despite finding them beautiful still. And so it would be more of a selfish thing where I'm actually just genuinely open-mindedly curious about this.
Interesting. And as I'm looking at it, I was wondering why you were saying 9th century, because Chrysostom was at the very beginning of the 5th century. But he, I guess, writes part of the divine liturgy. And then, the evolution of liturgy and why we do it, I think is really interesting.
And the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom is actually an iteration on the Liturgy of St. Basil and St. James. So the earliest version, extant version of the Liturgy of St. James we have, I think, is about 4th century. And if you read through that and you go to any Byzantine liturgy anywhere, it's like, oh, this is it. In many cases, word for word. A lot of the call and responses that you'll know, like lift up your hearts,
Corda.
All of those sorts of responses are there. The repeated calls to Lord have mercy, let all mortal flesh keep silent. That's what we find, because that's a communion hymn, not necessarily just a Christmas hymn. So yeah, all that stuff. It's a very long line, and it's a trail, whether sediment or a tree, whatever image that you want to give. It's very hard to say, oh, right, okay, this point, this is as good as we got, and then everything else after that was terrible. Although I completely agree with his opinion.
If your eyes kind of glaze over when liturgical Christians talk about liturgy, kind of like my eyes glaze over when these guys talk about coding, because I'm just so far out of my context. Let me pull it back a little bit and say, one of the things I love about Lewis is just to try to understand Lewis was an invitation to look at the whole of Western civilization and to see the development of ideas. And so Lewis kind of invites our way into that. He was also a literary historian. And so looking at the roots of why we think and say and pray and do the things that we do has always been helpful. I was talking with somebody, I forget who it was this week, and they were, lambasting me for, they're a Baptist, they're a Calvinist, and they're Protestant, and they're, all the rest, and Christianity isn't biblical, or, liturgical religion isn't biblical. And I said, it was the Catholic Church that gave us the Bible. Granted, it was the apostles who wrote Well, actually, it was a good conversation. It wasn't really a fight. But to understand that these things have their origins, and even the most hard-bitten Reformed Calvinists that I know, once they put the Reformation within a context, even when you see the Roman Catholic Church responding to the Reformation by the Council of Trent, which was reformational to some degree inside the church, to put it into a larger context, and how is my personal faith that I have right now and the Bible and all the practices, where did those all come from? And they came from a long line. And that idea of tradition, which means handing over, it's been handed on for years and years. And that's one of the reasons I love Lewis, is he helps me both in trying to understand him, broaden my education, but he also really has that whole of history, of Western history, and culture kind of in his head. So he'll quote from this 20th century and that 15th century and that 17th century, and then talk about ideas. And so just reading Lewis has been an invitation to broaden my own education about where things come from. So if you're not a liturgy nerd, if you don't worship liturgically, that's great. Understand why, and I'm not advocating that you change how you worship. But for me, once I began to understand the roots of the Reformation, what it was all responding to, all of that, I just felt like more a citizen of the Western world in a way that became more understandable to me, so that what I was doing had ties to older things in a way that was intelligible for me. And that made worship for me more, it allowed it to go further deep into my head and then into my heart and into my hands, which ultimately is what I want.
And Lewis is a fun conversational partner in this question, because he went to a service that in many ways he did not like. He has some scathing things to say about the music, and his essay on music is just wonderful. Savage.
Yeah. He's also wrong in some places. You can soundbite that for me if you'd like.
Oh, no. Yeah. I would agree. Lewis does get some things wrong, because I am the standard of truth, and I can tell him what he got right and what he got wrong.
But one of the great things that I love about him is he wanted to be argued with. He didn't mind getting things wrong, right? And he said to find an opponent is almost to find a friend, right? To find someone, he called himself hungry for rational opposition. And that's part of why he surrounded himself with, like he says in the Four Loves, I think, one cannot be wise oneself, one surrounds himself with the company of the wise, right? And he didn't mind being caught out. In fact, he delighted in it, because sometimes losing an argument is the best way to grow my understanding and to eliminate some of my own ignorance, of which there is plenty.
And then you get to plan your revenge, which is even more fun.
You are sinister and left-handed with that.
You should do it like Dave Portnoy. You ever heard what he does?
Who?
So he's like
the Barstool Pizza guy?
Yeah, it's Barstool Pizza guy. So his big thing is he's like, I'm the pettiest human ever. So when someone crosses him at an extreme level, he buys a bougie gold bottle of champagne, and he gets their name engraved on it, and he waits for their downfall and then pops it. So like Business Insider wrote a hit piece on him that was allegedly not correct, and he countered it on everything. And then the owner of it, Henry Blodgett, he gets it on. And then Henry Blodgett, like a year and a half later, gets fired from it. And so he literally records like a 4-minute video popping the champagne, celebrating. It's not biblical, but it's hilarious.
That is deliciously petty. Like it.
Yeah. He's the person that admits it.
Well, let's celebrate what some people are doing, because the number one podcast anywhere at the moment is actually former guest of the show, Father Mark Mary, Rosary in a Year. That's been top in the charts at the moment.
Great.
And also,
by the way, speaking of that, I don't know if are you switching away from Mary and Rosary?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'll cut in here. Remember your thought. So it's so funny how God has been like communicating to me and asking about like the 2025, and Father Mark Mary kind of was as well with this, but like literally 4 different things, and I'd have to remember them off the top of my head, happened where it was like, Matt, you need to pray the rosary every day again, because that had fallen out of my habit. And it was literally, I first just kind of felt the nudge myself. Then Mary Margaret and I come across this book by Louis de Montfort on the secrets of the rosary. And then the next day, Hallow says they're going to be doing a Sister Miriam James rosary thing. And then the next day I see Father Mark Mary's rosary podcast. Then the next day I read this thing from Louis de Montfort from a different source, actually. That was like the beautiful of praying 15 decades a day is one of the most beautiful things you can do, meditating on the life of Christ through all of them. I was like, well, I'm not getting to 3 rosaries a day. Let's be honest here. But anyways, that's my 2025 number one thing is a rosary every single day because of that doesn't really happen. I was like,
what did you say earlier about not letting people off? Why not 3?
Well, and listeners, for those of you for whom praying the rosary is something that you've never even begun to think about. And, one of the things that I've been learning from this book by Alan Jacobs is one of the fights in the Anglican communion was over set prayers versus extemporaneous prayers. And so just from a historical perspective, part of what happens in the Reformation is because set prayers for a lot of people become almost like incantations or rote and ritualistic, and the heart is not attached to the lips and whatever, and it becomes punishment and whatever, then the pendulum swings in the Reformation to only extemporaneous prayers. And that's the tradition that I was brought up in once I became a Christian. No set prayers, maybe the Lord's Prayer once in a while, but certainly not in every service. And then at prayer meetings or Bible studies, when it comes my time to pray, I'm nervous not only about praying theologically correctly, doing it artfully, addressing the need. I'm listening to see if anybody else kind of nods or murmurs, and if everybody is saying amen to my prayer as I'm praying it, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm really praying well. And the temptation of extemporaneous prayer is to focus too much on myself. The temptation of set prayers is also to focus too much on myself. What the enemy wants to do is to keep us from praying. And then if we must pray, he wants our heads and our hearts as detached from our lips as they can be. But what the Lord wants us to do is use prayer, any kind of prayer, to take us out of ourselves towards him. And so for me and for Lewis, he talks, I think, a little bit about this, not only in his letters, but also in letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. I want a mix of prayers. And Kristen says this really well, because she grew up in the same extemporaneous tradition that I did. She says, when I don't know how to pray, I'm so glad that I have the prayers of the sainted people throughout the centuries that have been used by others. And so to have a mix of set prayers and then cries of my own heart, as long as we're praying, I think that that's a good move. And then if I'm praying in such a way that I really am getting out of my own way and allowing God to speak to me and through my dead lips, as Lewis says, then that's a good step. So if the rosary is not part of your practice, fine. But continue to practice prayer and don't eschew set prayers just because they are set prayers. There's a lot of good in those ancient prayers and ancient wisdom. Sorry,
it's
sermonic rant.
I think you said that right, and I love the idea of not either or, but both and. I think you said it right. Like the standard for fixed prayer is meant to get you out of your head. Mm-hmm. Like it is genuinely meant to. In the same way, what's the point of liturgy? I feel like the beauty of liturgy is you do get out of your way and it calls up, draws you upward if done right. And then I think you stated, well, what does it look like if it's done wrong? Which can happen too. I always wondered, with the whole like complete anti-fixed prayer, like what was people's response to Christ, like our Father, and literally saying, this is all you need to do? I always wondered, like, it just seems so blatantly obvious that you can be like, you shouldn't be, oh, all you ever do is fixed prayer. That's it. Like, right. I can see that extreme, so, but like to say
if
none
you'd like
at all
to know,
seems
from an evangelical Protestant bibliocentric point of view, the scripture says, when you pray, pray like this. Yes. And so he's giving us a model. And so he's not saying, when you pray, say this exact prayer. Now, is it a good prayer? Of course, and no Protestant would avoid the Lord's Prayer. But then another thing that a bibliocentric Protestant evangelical expression would do would be to break down that prayer. In fact, I've heard wonderful devotions. If you take it word by word, the first word is our, right? And prayer unites us. And Father, not God, not Lord, not, God of the hosts, Father, who is in heaven, right? And so one of the approaches would be, let's break that down. Let's see exactly what Jesus is saying in the Bible. And how can I be part of a community? How can I think of God as a father, especially when I fail? How does him being in heaven help me here on earth? And so they would break down the biblical passage and go, okay, what help can I have, and how can that inform my daily prayers, right? So that's one approach to how they would do that. They wouldn't not use the Lord's Prayer, but they don't do it as much as liturgical Christians do.
And I'm sure we'll tackle these questions in more detail, probably in season 11, because then I'm hoping we'll be doing letters to Malcolm chiefly on prayer. And he speaks not only on prayer, but also liturgy. And it's also good. Where Lewis gives his biggest shout out to the liturgy that we mentioned earlier, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, because his fictional character goes to the Russian Mass, and he absolutely loves it.
Quite right. So I mentioned before we started, my bishop's daughter, Sophie Holcomb, who's been on here before, it's her 16th birthday this weekend. And her family's taken her to see Max McLean. Max is coming to do Screw Tape here in Orlando. And her father let me know that I had given him a first edition of Letters to Malcolm, a British first, and that she's borrowed it, but she wants to annotate one. So I'm going to give her a nice first edition, later printing of the American version of Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, for her birthday. But this won't go out live, so she won't know. And so I'll give it to her tomorrow. Unless it's going out live.
It's not. I was planning on sending it out today, but I can.
I'll send it out
today.
Tomorrow. Send it out today. If she's watching that well, she can anticipate what I'm giving her.
Well, we are pretty much at time. We didn't really get to resolutions in the end. So I'm just going to end by pointing out a notable birth already this year. Walter Louis Lepojarvi.
Oh, yes.
And with names like that kid's got a lot to live up to. That's all I'm going to say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, with that, let's do this again sometime.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.